With around 60 hours into Ascended so far, I believe I'm qualified to give you some tips that will make things easier for you when starting out. While we will focus on single player here, pretty much all of these tips apply to multiplayer as well, and will definitely help you out. Let's start with what is probably the most important tip in the beginning. No matter how tempting going deep into the island's jungles and swamps may be, you should stay close to your spawning points in the game's early stages. Ideally, you selected a green spawning point close to the beaches in the south. Here you will have access to all basic materials and resources, while facing a relatively small amount of dangerous carnivores. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be cautious around these early game areas. There are certain biomes that are very close to your spawn points. And those biomes will have carnivores like raptors, sarcos, but also stuff like insects and swamp fever that's very hard to cure as a new player. And even much worse stuff that will absolutely annihilate you in the beginning. Believe me when I say that this is not an exaggeration. It's also worth mentioning that occasionally, aggressive dinosaurs get lost and end up in your usually safe beach areas. So you always need to be prepared to face tough enemies. Now I could tell you exactly which areas you should avoid, but finding out stuff for yourself is part of the fun in Ark games, even if it is the hard way. The best approach would be to make little trips each time a little longer, as you progress in the game, to familiarize yourself with the area. Just remember to not take valuable items or tames with you. This game is very unforgiving and will not hold your hand. There's a really easy way to get a lot of spoiled meat, a main ingredient for crafting narcotics. Here's how to do it. Splitting a stack of meat when the top one is nearly rotten will create individual meats with the same decay value, so you can time it to get a lot of spoiled meat easily. Here you can see based on a timer that one piece of meat of the stack is about to spoil in a few seconds. So when we are splitting the stack into single pieces instead, all of them have the same timer now. And before you know it, you just got yourself a lot of spoiled meat with as little effort as possible. We just talked about speeding up the spoil times of your items, but what about items you don't want to spoil? There are a few cool ways how you can deal with unwanted spoil times of your items. You can put your items into a preserving bin, craftable at level 18. Take this cooked prayer meat for example. It spoils in around 40 minutes in our inventory, but if we put it into the bin, it extends this timer to 7 hours per piece. Just keep in mind that the preserving bin needs spark powder to run. In addition to this, dino inventories have significantly longer spoil times than the player inventory, which is especially useful for raw prime meat that spoils very quickly in your inventory. This is a quick one, but absolutely go loot the supply drops. Their loot is pretty ridiculous at times, and much better than in Evolved. In case you don't know, the different colors tell the level requirements, and therefore, also to some extent, the quality of the drops. When you're just starting out, building a massive house or shelter with wood is probably not viable. I recommend building a thatch shelter for the first nights. You unlock the engrams in the first few levels. The building parts are not as costly as wood, and it still gets the job done. The small rocks on the beaches and in water are a decent metal source for early game. Just remember to hit them with your pick, not your hatchet. You should also know that picks are used for gathering thatch from trees, flint and metal from rocks, and meat from creatures. The thatchet on the other hand is used for gathering hide from creatures, stone from rocks, and wood from trees. Bowlers are your best friend early game. This throwable item is learned very early at level 9 and keeps an affected dinosaur stuck in place. They don't work on larger dinosaurs, but they are especially useful for restricting the movement of raptors, which will often be the biggest threat for beginners. They are also great for immobilizing dinos you want to tame. While you're of course free to build your character the way you want, there are certain attributes that are excellent to put points into, and there are attributes that are considered pretty much useless. Put points primarily into health and weight, but also stamina until you notice that you're not running out of stamina anymore. Fortitude is another helpful stat that's very useful when playing in extreme temperatures, which at a certain point in the game you're basically forced to do when going to the mountains. I strongly recommend to not ever put points into food and thirst. Those two are a waste, and not worth it in my opinion. This one may sound like a weird one, but it really made things less frustrating for me when I started doing it. Save every few minutes, because the game crashes frequently on a lot of systems. Sometimes you can play 7 hours straight, without a single crash. and sometimes it will crash 3 times in an hour. Additionally to this, you should be mentally prepared to face some potentially game-breaking bugs in this game. I haven't encountered too many of them, but sometimes my loot bag after dying simply glitched through the floor and was gone forever with very valuable items. And sometimes my character's voice randomly changes, and only suicide can revert that back. So I guess my tip here is, do keep in mind that this game is in early access. The last one is probably as important as the first one. You should expect that behind every corner is a danger you probably don't expect, and therefore you should be prepared to die a lot in this game. It really is a brutal game. Learn to not let that discourage you, because while you may lose all items you had on you, should you fail to retrieve them, or the game bugs out, or your favorite tame gets killed by a Giganotosaurus in an eye blink, there is one thing the game doesn't take away from you. The most important thing actually. And that is experience, both the actual XP used to level up and the experience you gain as a player. That's it for today. If you found this helpful, a like or comment is of course appreciated.